My name is Isabel Monroe. I'm 30 years old, and right now I'm sitting behind the curtain at the International Women's Leadership Conference. In a few minutes, I'll walk out under the lights, take the microphone, and say something I once believed I would never have the chance to say out loud. From the right wing, the curtain gapes just enough for me to see a corner of the packed hall. Through that thin slice of view, I see her, Lily. My little sister, the one who 2 years ago stood up in the middle of our mother's birthday party, raised her wine glass, laughed, and said, "That's just how my sister is." The family's biggest disappointment. There were 47 people there that night. 47 faces turned toward me. No one burst into laughter, but no one defended me either. Not my parents, not my aunts and uncles, no one. It felt like a wordless vote, as if Lily had simply spoken a truth everyone already accepted but had never dared to say aloud. Now she walks into the auditorium holding a small notebook, moving with the same soft confidence she's always had. She doesn't know I'm here. She doesn't know I'm today's opening keynote speaker, the first voice at the biggest event of the year. She's come to write down quotes from women talking about being underestimated, about judgment, about rising anyway. She has no idea one of those women is me. She has no idea that the woman who'll step onto that stage in a few minutes is the sister she flicked into the shadows 2 years ago. My fingers tight around the microphone. The metal feels slick, not from sweat but from the tiny tremor I can't quite stop. It isn't fear. It's the shock of standing inside a moment I've replayed in my head hundreds of times, and now discovering it's finally, undeniably real. I don't need revenge, I don't need to shame her. I don't need to raise my voice or prove anything. I just need to walk out there, tell my story, and let the truth speak for itself. 2 years ago, I was the family disappointment. Today, I'm the keynote speaker, if someone you love has ever humiliated you in front of others. If you've ever sat unnoticed in a room full of people who were supposed to be your own, if you've ever quietly wondered, do I even belong in this family? Stay with me. This is the story of a woman who used to stay silent and learned to stand tall, not by fighting back, but by building her own path step by steady step. I grew up in Bloomington, a small town in southern Indiana where winters weren't brutal, but the cold always managed to seep in through old wooden window frames and into dinner conversations. From the outside, we were stable, ordinary, enviable. My dad was an interior design engineer at a local firm. My mom taught second grade at the elementary school across the lake. We weren't rich, but we were never short. A family of 4, 2 daughters, a comfortable house, a perfect picture. No one ever asked if I was perfect because I was happy or because I was careful enough not to cause trouble. I was the eldest, Isabel, quiet, bookish, self-sufficient to a fault. From the moment I learned to read, I'd curl up under the living room lamp with stacks of worn comic books Mom found at flea markets. I tied my own shoes, never complained if we skipped ice cream, never threw tantrums when I heard no. I took care of things on my own until taking care of things alone became who I was. And then there was Lily. Lily walked into a room like a switch had flipped. Everything seemed to glow a little brighter. 2 years younger, she had a halo of natural blonde curls, big doll eyes, and a laugh my mother once called the music of life. She sang, she twirled, she doodled all over the walls. Each scribble was admired as a sign of her artistic soul. I wrote poems in a notebook and hid it under my pillow. My parents would say, "Lily needs more attention." "You're already good at everything, right, Isabel?" I was 8. I nodded and swallowed my questions like bitter candy that never melted. When I was 9, my birthday fell the same weekend as Lily's preschool party. Mom said, "Just hang in there this week, honey. We'll celebrate your birthday next week." Next week never came. I woke up to an old book wrapped in newspaper left on the breakfast table. No candles, no singing, no party. That same year, Lily's birthday was held at the fanciest Italian restaurant in town. Her name printed on balloons, a 3-tiered cake, a professional photographer snapping endless pictures. I wasn't jealous. I just learned to remember what I was expected to forget and to erase the moments I should have been allowed to keep. Every time I brought home an A+, Mom would smile and say, "Good. You're the big sister, you're supposed to set an example." When Lily landed the lead in her 3rd grade play, The Little Mermaid, her posters covered our fridge. Dad invited relatives to attend. Mom baked cupcakes for the whole class. In 6th grade, I placed second in a statewide short story contest. Mom glanced at my certificate and said, "That's good, but next time try writing something happier. Your stories are too dark." At some point, I realized there seemed to be only one way to be loved in our house: be cute, be bubbly, be social, be someone they could show off. I wasn't that girl. I didn't know how to perform, I didn't know how to be charming, I didn't know how to make them understand that I mattered too, so I stepped into a silence no one asked for but everyone expected. If I was good, I should manage alone. If I was sad, I was too sensitive. I yielded so Lily could shine. I said yes even when I wanted to say no. I accepted things that hurt because there was no space to say otherwise. Nothing was taken from me, nothing was offered to me either. Slowly, everything inside turned hollow. Once I asked my mother why my birthdays were always so simple while Lily's were elaborate. She smiled, because you don't need flashy things. You're practical. I've spent years wondering, when did practical become a reason to deserve less love? By 10th grade, Lily had become the highlight of every proud parent's story. Cheerleading awards, student body vice president, photographs with the mayor at environmental campaigns. I joined the literature club, wrote articles, and printed a small newsletter I pinned to the library bulletin board. No one noticed, no one asked. At parent-teacher nights, they were excited to hear about Lily. They assumed I was fine, and when everyone assumes you're fine, no one ever checks if you really are. If you live in silence long enough, a moment comes when you realize you don't need to scream. You just need to leave, but I didn't leave, not yet. I stayed because I still hoped one day they would finally see me. I told myself that if I tried a little harder, worked a little more, maybe someday it would be my turn to be celebrated. I was wrong. The day that last fragile hope shattered came in the quietest, cruelest way. It was early April. A light rain ticked against the windows like half-heard whispers. My parents' house glowed warm with candlelight and purple orchids for Mom's 55th birthday. Almost the entire extended family was there, uncles, aunts, cousins who'd flown in from out of town. Lily, of course, was the main organizer. She floated through the house in an elegant white dress, clipboard wedged in the crook of her arm, smile ready for every camera. Everyone praised her for being so grown-up, such a natural event planner. I stood in the kitchen, arranging desserts on a plate. No one had asked me to, I just did. I wore a plain dark blue dress. Unremarkable, I whispered to myself, this is Mom's night, it isn't about fairness. I'd said some version of that to myself for years. Dinner was all warm chatter, clinking glasses, the smell of Mom's favorite lasagna. I sat in the middle of the long table, directly across from Lily. Mom sat at the head, her hand nestled in Dad's, face soft with happiness. I had just reached for the vegetables when Lily's voice floated out, light and teasing, as if she were making a harmless joke. My sister's always been like that, she said, the silent failure of the family. Everything stopped, chopsticks paused midair, a chair scraped slowly, someone gave a small, nervous chuckle. Someone cleared their throat. I remember an uncle nodding faintly as though confirming a fact. Dad gave a vague smile and said nothing. Mom stared into her wine, lips curling in a half-smirk. No one said, Lily, that's out of line. No one said, don't joke like that. No one said, Isabel, that isn't true. They just let the words hang there. A wound everyone saw, but no one bothered to bandage. Because for them it wasn't a wound, it was normal. I met Lily's eyes. She smiled, either unaware or unwilling to see that she had just carved a deep gash into me, not with malice. Worse, with casual indifference. I stood up slowly and reached for a napkin. Conversations resumed, folding over me as if the sound of my chair pushing back was an everyday noise. I walked down the hall to the downstairs bathroom and closed the door. I didn't turn on the light. I leaned my forehead against the mirror. In the dark, my reflection was a blur, like my place in this family. My throat felt wrapped in something invisible and tight. They don't see me, I whispered. Maybe they never have. I turned on the faucet, splashed water on my face, dried my hands carefully just to keep from crying. Then I sat on the little windowsill, hugging a cushion like I was trying to hold myself together from the outside. Laughter drifted from the dining room, warped and thin like an old song played on a damaged tape, familiar but painful. I sat there for nearly 20 minutes. No one knocked, no one called my name. No one wondered, where is Isabel? When I went back, the cake was already sliced. Mom was radiant, Dad refilled wine glasses, Lily posed for selfies with our younger cousins. I slipped into my seat. Mom glanced at me. Where were you? I almost cut the cake without you. Sorry, I said, I wasn't feeling well. She nodded, satisfied, and turned back to her guests. I ate my piece of cake in silence, then helped clear dishes like I always did. Someone asked how I'd been. I said, still working in New York. They nodded politely and turned toward Lily. We heard you're about to lead a media campaign in Boston. That's amazing. Lily's face lit up. Yes, I'm flying out next week. Later, in my hotel room, I sat upright on the bed, staring at the city lights outside the window. I didn't cry, I didn't rage, I just felt hollow. The silent failure of the family repeated inside me like a needle stuck on a record, a label that had probably been there for years, finally spoken aloud. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to argue, I wasn't going to beg anyone to see me, I didn't need apologies or explanations. I needed one thing: to make that statement untrue. The only way to do that, I realized, was through a different kind of silence. Not the silence of surrender, but the silence of someone quietly walking out of a house that never saw her and building a place in the world with her own hands. A place no one could dismiss. A name no one would dare laugh at again, and when that day came, I wouldn't have to confront them. I would simply stand in a room full of people and let them draw their own conclusions. I left Indiana on a bright but bitterly cold Sunday. No one saw me off because no one knew I was leaving. I didn't consider it running away. It felt more like closing a book I'd been forced to keep rereading. In my old suitcase, I packed a few office outfits, a stack of dog-eared psychology books, and an acceptance letter to a graduate program in applied psychology in New York, a letter I had received 2 days after that dinner. My new room was on the 3rd floor of a crumbling building in Brooklyn. Cracked walls, a leaking faucet, unreliable outlets, and winter wind that slashed through the window frame like blades. The landlord, a widowed man from Pakistan, didn't pry. He just said, "I don't allow late rent. But if you need an extra blanket, I have one." I thanked him and began my new life on cheap sandwiches and fragmented sleep under yellow streetlight. By day, I studied in the university library. At night, I worked at a coffee shop 3 subway stops away. I brewed lattes, wiped tables, and smiled until my cheeks ached. I thought I knew exhaustion. I didn't, not until I'd worked a 6-hour evening shift, taken the 1:00 a.m. train home, showered in icy water because the heater died again, and sat down at 2:00 a.m. to finish a group rebuttal for my psychology seminar. No one from home called. No one asked how I was managing. Only one person checked in every week without fail, Miss Thompson, my 12th grade English teacher. Her first message arrived on a Wednesday night. "I heard about the dinner. Are you okay?" I stared at my phone for a long time before answering. My eyes burned, but something inside me eased. She never lectured me. Her texts were simple. "Are you getting enough sleep? I just read this article and thought of you." I never told her everything, but somehow she understood what I needed, not advice, but a quiet place for my heart to land. One day she wrote, "Isabel, you once told me you wanted more than just to survive. Remember?" "Yes," I typed back, "but I don't know where to start." A moment later, she sent a link: Women Lead Forward, a leadership program for women who had been overlooked. The tagline made my chest ache. They took only 12 women each year. I didn't expect anything, but I applied anyway. I wrote my application like each sentence was a breath I was reclaiming. I wrote about growing up where already good enough meant forgot. About that empty chair at the birthday dinner. About the cold brick wall in my Brooklyn room where I leaned my head when I was too tired to cry. I didn't write to be chosen. I wrote because, for the first time, I wanted to speak without shrinking. 2 weeks later, an email appeared: "We are deeply moved by your story, Isabel." I read that line 3 times before I believed it. My hands shook as I typed my acceptance. When I walked out of the coffee shop that morning, the New York sky was gray and heavy, but inside me something had started to glow. Not everyone shared my excitement. When I called home to tell them, my mother said, "Leadership, who would you ever lead?" My father grunted. "So you're finally giving up on a stable career, huh?" Lily sent one text. "Stop trying so hard. Not everyone is meant for the spotlight." I turned off my phone. I didn't cry. For the first time, their disbelief didn't move me. I understood I no longer needed their approval, but their voices still echoed in my head as I walked into the first week of training. The other participants were accomplished: managers, founders, women with impressive titles and networks. I sat at the far end of the table, pen in hand, taking scrupulous notes, terrified of being called on. I didn't tell anyone I'd pulled espresso shots until midnight the night before. That my clothes were second-hand, that I'd eaten instant noodles for 3 meals straight that week. One Friday, a mentor said, "Share a moment when you felt your voice didn't matter." I hadn't intended to speak. Then I remembered the clink of Lily's chopsticks, my mother's eyes fixed on her wine, the way every face at the table turned away from me. I raised my hand. I told the story quietly, steadily, no tears, no dramatics. When I finished, the room was silent. The lead mentor, a consultant who had once taught at Harvard, looked at me and said, "You're not here to learn leadership. You're here to remember you've been leading yourself for a very long time. Life didn't suddenly become easy. I still worked extra shifts. I still scrubbed laundry in the bathtub on Sundays. But something in me shifted. I was no longer the Isabel who feared being seen. I was the Isabel who could finally look herself in the eye. And when you do that, you realize no one gets to call you a failure unless you give them permission. I don't give that permission anymore, not to strangers, not to my family, not even to Lily." The program focused on emotional leadership, something I'd always thought I lacked, growing up where feelings were meant to be controlled, not expressed. But I discovered that being ignored had sharpened my ability to notice others. People who know the taste of silence are the ones who recognize it in someone else's eyes. In one workshop, we were asked to write a free-form essay on the question, "Where does leadership begin within you?" That night I sat by the small window in my room, watching the streetlights dance on the faded wall, and wrote. I titled it "The Unseen Daughters on Being Invisible in Your Own Family." I didn't try to be poetic, I just told the truth, calm and unflinching. I wrote about the birthday gift wrapped in newspaper, the empty chair no one noticed I'd left. The party where 47 people heard a sentence that felt more like a verdict, and not one person objected. I didn't write to accuse. I wrote so that anyone who had lived that kind of life would know they weren't alone. At first, I only shared it with my class, but one woman, a journalist, asked to post it on her personal blog. I agreed on one condition: not a single word could be changed. Within 2 weeks, the essay had over 1 million views. I didn't understand why it had spread so fast, but I understood this. There were far too many people who had grown up in shadows, branded strong, so they didn't deserve support. Labeled disappointment without ever being given a chance. Messages from strangers flooded my inbox. "Thank you for writing what I never had the courage to say." I cried because someone finally put my life into words. A professor from my old school emailed to tell me he'd printed the essay for his family psychology class. A woman from Texas wrote, "Can you help me talk to my daughter? I'm afraid I made her feel this way too." I got invitations to appear on small podcasts to talk about healing, about leading from pain. I spoke from my dim room, drinking homemade tea in front of an old laptop borrowed from the university. No studio, no spotlight, just listening, just truth. One afternoon in early September, an email came inviting me to serve as a psychological advisor for a support group of women who had endured emotional abuse in their homes. The coordinator, a mother of 3 who had left her husband after a decade of quiet disregard, had read my essay and tracked down my contact information any way she could. "Why me?" I asked her over Zoom. "Because you don't only understand the theory," she said. "You've lived it." That was the beginning of something I had never dared to imagine, my own small organization, not to rescue anyone but to hold space. A space for women who had been overlooked, diminished, compared, or told to toughen up. A place where they could finally be seen. I called it the Second Daughter Project. It wasn't big, no sponsors. No fancy branding. Just Saturday night Zoom circles, a private online group for people afraid to use their real names, and a free Google Doc toolkit on how to rewrite the personal story others had written for you. They showed up one by one: a 23-year-old who'd just left a toxic home, a 41-year-old who'd never once heard her mother say, "I'm proud of you," teachers, nurses, students. Stay-at-home moms, lawyers. From the outside, they were functioning adults. On the inside, many carried a small, aching hollow labeled, "I was never seen." We didn't call ourselves victims. We were the unheard, finally learning to listen to ourselves. When someone asked, "What do you do?" I no longer shrank. I met their eyes and answered, "I'm the founder of the Second Daughter Project." Because if you've ever been dismissed, overshadowed, or written off, there is nothing more powerful than returning, not to explain but to build something of your own. No defenses, no justifications, no apologies for existing. That's when I realized I was no longer living to be validated. I was living so that I would never again abandon myself. One January morning, I was pouring tea in my tiny kitchen when I heard an email chime. I received dozens of messages a week from participants, podcast hosts, strangers with stories, so I didn't hurry. Then I glanced at the subject line and froze. Keynote speaking invitation, International Women's Leadership Conference. For a second, I thought it was spam. My hand stopped midair, hot water sloshed over the side of the cup unnoticed. I clicked. We are honored to invite you, Isabel Monroe, to be the keynote speaker at the annual International Women's Leadership Conference in Boston. After reading your essay, The Unseen Daughters, and witnessing the impact of the Second Daughter Project, the committee believes your journey will inspire the thousands of women attending. I read it once, twice, 3 times, then I sank into my chair and pressed my palm against my chest just to feel my heart still beating steadily. I thought of writing that essay by a weak lamp while subway trains rattled underground, never imagining that those words would carry me to a stage like this. I said yes, not immediately. It took me a full day to click send, not from doubt but from the weight of what it meant. I knew I would no longer be speaking just for myself. I'd be speaking for every unseen daughter who had ever sat quietly at a table and swallowed her pain. A week later, the organizers sent the official guest list to help me shape my remarks. I skimmed through founders, professors, psychologists, activists, each with photos and titles. Near the bottom, my cursor halted. Lily Monroe, Campaign Director, WME Foundation, my sister. My throat clenched, my fingers tightened on the mouse. It wasn't someone with the same name, it was her. She would be there in that hall, perhaps only a few rows from the stage, unaware that the woman invited to open the conference was the silent failure she'd named 2 years ago. I didn't feel rage. Just a deep, terrifying stillness, almost familiar. The kind of quiet I'd felt when I walked out of that bathroom on Mom's birthday and realized nothing in that house would ever change. It was as if the universe had quietly closed a circle I'd stopped trying to force. 3 days later, a text came from an unsaved number. No name, no greeting, you know, don't you? 3 words. I knew exactly who had written them. I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me wanted to answer. Another part wanted to delete the message and pretend we had never shared a childhood. I turned off my phone. Silence this time was not surrender, it was a choice. I didn't need a confrontation or explanation. I didn't owe anyone the story of how I got here. All I needed was to step onto that stage, tell the truth, and let it shine where it belonged. If a pair of eyes happened to drop while I spoke, it wouldn't be because I'd shamed anyone. It would be because truth, once spoken clearly, doesn't ask permission. And that, I realized, was the real turning point, not that someone had finally chosen me, but that I had chosen myself and the rest of the world was simply catching up. At exactly 8:00 p.m. the hall lights rose, the seats were full, a soft murmur rippled across the room, cameras flashed. Opening music swelled. From behind the curtain I could see the front row reserved for special guests, white table linens, name cards in precise rows. In the 6th seat from the left I saw her. Lily wore a cream blazer. Her blonde hair was curled and tucked neatly behind one ear. She was talking to an older woman, chin slightly raised in that familiar, self-assured way. She had no idea what was coming, the inescapable presence of the sister she had once erased. My heartbeat was slow and steady now. The shaking was gone. There was only a quiet certainty, like a bell tone lingering after a storm. A crew member signaled. I nodded. On stage, the MC's voice lifted. And now, please welcome the founder of the Second Daughter Project and author of the viral essay, The Unseen Daughters, which has touched the hearts of over 1 million readers worldwide. Our keynote speaker today, Isabel Monroe. Applause began, scattered, then grew into a solid wave. I walked to center stage. The spotlight washed over me, and for a moment the faces in front blurred together, except one, Lily's. She looked up, eyes widening, lips parting. Confusion flashed, then disbelief, then something that froze her in her seat. I didn't hold her gaze. I didn't need anything from her. I turned toward the sea of faces and began. Good evening. My name is Isabel Monroe. I was once called the silent disappointment of my family. As it turns out, that label was a strange kind of gift. The room stilled, no murmurs. Just attentive quiet, like a blank page waiting for ink. I grew up as the eldest daughter in a family where silence was praised and independence was mistaken for needing nothing. I heard things like, you're already good, you don't need more praise, and you're strong, let your sister shine. I was never hit, never screamed at. But I was rarely, truly seen. I told them about the book wrapped in newspaper, the empty seat at a birthday table that no one noticed I'd left. The day I left home and not a single person asked me to stay, I didn't name names or point fingers. I simply shared the outlines of the life I'd lived. I watched faces soften, brows furrow. I could tell many of them were drifting back into their own childhoods, to that quiet corner where they'd once sat hoping someone would ask, "Are you okay?" No one ever did. I spoke of New York, peeling paint, cold showers, late-night shifts, and coming home to write scholarship essays not to prove my worth, but to survive years of believing I had none. Then I spoke about the essay I wrote just to hear my own voice again and how it became a chorus for thousands. I'm not standing here to seek revenge, I said. I'm not sharing this to make anyone bow their head. I'm here to tell you that if you were cut out of the family picture because you didn't fit, you were never the problem. You were simply placed in the wrong frame. I talked about the Second Daughter Project, about women who'd learned how to come home to themselves. About a generation of second daughters who were never chosen but still existed, steady, radiant, whole. I'm not here because someone graciously opened a door for me, I finished. I'm here because I stopped asking for permission to exist. When I ended, the room was utterly silent for a single, stretching beat. Then the applause broke loose, rolling over me, rising to the ceiling. People stood, first a few, then entire rows, then the whole hall. I didn't smile or cry. I simply stood there, upright and unmistakably present. I glanced at the front row. Lily was still seated. Her hands were locked tightly in her lap. She wasn't clapping. But her eyes gave her away. She looked down, not crushed, but finally painfully aware of me. The truth, when spoken calmly from the center of your own life, doesn't need to shout. It carries itself. Today it carried me. Someone once called me the silent disappointment. I had just made an entire hall rise, not to prove them wrong, but to prove that truth always finds its place if you don't give up before it gets there. Afterward, I slipped off the stage without lingering. Not because no one stopped me, I heard my name, felt hands reaching, but because I needed a moment that wasn't filled with congratulations. I took the quieter hallway along the side of the auditorium, white walls, high ceilings, soft recessed lights, a small pocket of calm. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. My heart, which had hammered on stage, now beat evenly. What I felt wasn't triumph, it was something quieter, peace, the kind that had taken me 30 years to find. Footsteps clicked softly behind me. I opened my eyes. Lily stood there, clutching her notebook. Her eyes were red-rimmed. The pages looked untouched. Her gaze searchingly met mine. No polished composure, no easy confidence. Just something raw and unsure. You knew I'd be here, she asked, barely above a whisper. I held her eyes steady. No. But you see me now, don't you? She bit her lower lip and nodded almost imperceptibly. I didn't know, she murmured. I never imagined. How did you become this strong? I tilted my head, not smiling but not hard. Since the night you called me the disappointment of the family, I said quietly. And no one stood up for me. Her shoulders flinched. She lowered her head, fingers tightening around the notebook's spine. After a moment, she looked up again, lips trembling. I'm sorry, she whispered. I never understood, not until today. I let out a slow breath, not because I'd been waiting for those words, but because in that instant I realized I didn't need them. I don't need an apology, I said. I needed acknowledgement. You gave me that when you lowered your head. Her eyes shimmered, her voice shook. I always thought you didn't need anyone, she said. You were so strong, I didn't see that you had to be strong because no one asked if you were okay. I nodded. Exactly. I used to believe if I was good enough, quiet enough, useful enough, one day I'd finally be chosen. I paused, but sometimes it has nothing to do with being enough. Sometimes they already chose someone else and you just never made it into the frame. Lily's hands curled into fists, tears welled up again. From now on, she blurted, if anyone asks me who I admire most, I won't name celebrities, I'll say you. I placed my hand gently on her shoulder, warm, steady. I don't need to be admired, I said. I just need you to understand this. No one has the right to define another person as a failure. Not even family. We stood side by side, not embracing, not performing reconciliation for anyone's benefit. Just two women sharing, for the first time, the same level ground. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't a single moment, it's a process. Today that process began not with an apology but with a look, with a bowed head, with finally being seen. I walked away first. Not to leave her behind, but because I knew now neither of us had to stay behind. I no longer needed someone at my side to prove I wasn't alone. I had learned how to stand. And there was nothing left to prove. I returned to New York on a soft, rainy afternoon. The city was still noisy, crowded, relentless, but something fundamental in me had changed. It wasn't just peace, it was wholeness. For the first time in years, I unlocked my apartment door without feeling that something was missing. I didn't need anyone waiting on the other side. I didn't need open arms or a warm voice calling my name. For the first time, I knew I had arrived home to myself. My workspace looked the same. The white porcelain teacup still sat in the corner of the desk, the bookshelf still sagged with project files, sticky notes still dotted the wall in a chaotic map. Only one thing was new, a framed photograph above my desk. It was taken mid-speech. I stand at the center of the stage, microphone in hand, light glancing off my shoulder. The rows of the audience blur into the background, but in that blur, one face is turned up toward me, her expression quiet, present, Lily. I sit down and pull out the journal I've carried since my first days in New York. Its pages are yellowed, my handwriting slanted and crossed out, thoughts crammed into margins. I flip to the last page. In black ink, underlined once, I read, "You don't need to be chosen to succeed. You just need to choose yourself so you don't disappear." I close the journal and slide it onto the shelf. There is nothing important left unwritten. Everything I once needed to say, I have said. Everything I once strained to prove, I now live. If you've ever been called a burden, a disappointment, not good enough. If you've ever sat at a family dinner and heard your name turned into a joke while no one defended you. If you've ever had to leave home not to chase glory but simply to be yourself, remember this. You don't need to scream to matter. You don't need to beg to be seen. You don't have to be perfect to be worthy of love. Let your silence, your steadiness, your persistence, your quiet light speak for you, because real light never needs permission. It only needs you not to put it out.